The poison of arrogance. The silent takedown. Stop scrolling, people. Get ready for one of the most spectacular financial wipeouts and silent revenge plots you will ever witness. If you live for karma and massive, unexpected twists, then prove it right now. Hit that like button, share this with a friend who loves a good comeback story, and most importantly, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next epic saga. Arrogance is a dangerous drug. For Julian Thorne, it was a blinding narcotic, as potent as the soaring success that had lifted him to the top. He stood on the balcony of the Grand Presidential Suite, valued at $20,000 a night, at the exclusive Azure Coast Sanctuary in Laguna Beach, California. His arm was draped around Sierra, a woman who was decidedly not his wife. He had brought his mistress to the most secluded luxury hideaway in the U.S. to celebrate the end of his 15-year marriage, assuming his wife, Clara Sterling, quiet and timid, would be at home in Greenwich, Connecticut, drowning in tears. He was about to rub his new life right in her face, but Julian made a catastrophic mistake. He assumed he was the predator, when he was, in fact, just a fool walking straight into a perfectly set trap. The Sunset Triumph in Laguna, the sleek custom mahogany speedboat sliced through the turquoise waters off the coast, its polished deck gleaming like obsidian under the late afternoon sun. Julian Thorne checked his watch, a Richard Mille tourbillon, a $500,000 statement piece that screamed, "I have conquered." Beside him, Sierra, poured into a neon yellow dress, angled her phone to capture his profile against the dramatic backdrop of the San Joaquin Hills. "Is it like exclusive, babe?" she asked, her voice a breathless murmur. "I don't want to see families. I don't want to see basic people." "The Azure Coast Sanctuary, darling," Julian replied, his voice resonating with the smug self-satisfaction of a man who had just won the world. "It's not a hotel. It's a private estate holding. They only have 10 suites. The wait list is 3 years, unless you're me." Of course, he had leveraged a phenomenal quarter at his hedge fund, Thorne Capital, to pressure his private bank concierge into securing the reservation. This trip was a victory lap. 2 days prior, he'd instructed his lawyers to serve the divorce papers on his wife, Clara. Clara. The name tasted like ash. Boring, beige, predictable Clara. She was the woman he had married 15 years ago, a strategic merger between his new money ambition and her family's respectable, discreet, old money name. She had been the counterbalance he needed then, but now she was just dead weight. Clara spent her days quietly running the Sterling family office, a small trust he never bothered to investigate, and dedicating herself to discreet philanthropy. She was a ghost in their minimalist mansion, a woman who wore cashmere in neutral tones and never, ever raised her voice. Sierra was the opposite. She was loud, demanding, and spectacularly gorgeous. She was a breathing, living trophy, a testament to his soaring success. The speedboat throttled down, pulling up to a stone jetty wrapped in ancient wisteria. A man in an immaculate linen suit waited. It was Mr. Declan Reed, the general manager. "Mr. Thorne, welcome to the Azure Coast Sanctuary," Declan said, his smile polite but devoid of warmth. "We have the Grand Presidential Suite," Julian announced, not as a question, but as a statement. "Of course, sir, if you'll follow me." The grounds were magnificent, a terraced paradise of Italian cypresses and vibrant bougainvillea. Julian felt a surge of power. This was his world now. As they were led to the main villa, a converted 1920s Spanish Revival mansion, Julian stopped short. "My bags," he snapped, pointing toward the jetty. "They are already in your suite, sir," Declan smoothly replied. The Grand Presidential Suite was bigger than his first apartment. It was an expanse of marble, custom millwork, and modern Italian furniture, with a private terrace that seemed to float above the ocean. "This will do," Sierra said, collapsing onto a sun lounger and immediately starting a video for her followers. Julian, meanwhile, cornered Declan. "I'll need a dinner reservation for tonight, 8 o'clock, the best table at your restaurant, the Mariner, and I'll require a specific wine, a double magnum of Screaming Eagle 1997. Declan's eyebrow twitched, the slightest flicker of surprise. "Sir, our restaurant focuses on indigenous California varietals. I am almost certain we do not carry that particular Napa Cabernet." "Then find it." Julian cut him off with a dismissive gesture. "Have it flown in from San Francisco. I don't care about the cost. I'm celebrating a significant personal victory." "As you wish, sir," Declan said, his voice clipped. "Will Mrs. Thorne be joining you on this trip?" Julian let out a dry laugh. "My wife? God, no. She's not exactly the Azure Coast Sanctuary type. She'll be home, likely, cataloging stamps or whatever she does. We're getting a divorce." "This," he said, gesturing toward Sierra, "is the future." Declan's expression remained unreadable. He simply nodded. "I see. Please enjoy your stay, Mr. Thorne." As the manager left, Julian popped the cork on the complimentary champagne. He felt invincible. He had his youth, or a close facsimile of it, a dazzling mistress, and a rapidly expanding fortune. He had finally cut the cord from his boring, passionless marriage. He raised his glass to Sierra. "To new beginnings," he toasted. "To us," she giggled, clinking her glass against his. The arrogance cracks. The first 24 hours were a blur of decadent indulgence, precisely as Julian had planned. He and Sierra were deliberately, extravagantly loud. They monopolized the main infinity pool, taking endless photos and ordering magnums of rosé before noon. Julian took work calls poolside, shouting aggressive instructions to his traders about how to short a new tech stock. "We're going to bleed them dry, Robert," he yelled into his phone, enjoying the gestures of annoyance from an older couple reading nearby. Sierra, meanwhile, treated the staff with casual disdain that mirrored Julian's. She sent back a plate of prosciutto and melon because the melon was too orange. She complained that the thread count of the pool towels was acceptable, but not incredible. Julian loved it. He loved her arrogance. It reflected his own. That evening, they dressed for their dinner at the Mariner. Julian was clasping his Richard Mill when his lawyer, Ethan, called from New York. "Julian, just confirming. Papers were served at Clara's residence this morning. The process server noted she accepted them personally." "And, did she cry? Did she crumble?" Julian asked, straightening his silk tie. "The server only said she was polite." "She signed and closed the door." Julian scoffed. "Polite, of course. She's probably already called her mother and retreated to the family compound in Newport. Pathetic." "Good. The sooner she accepts it, the sooner I can finalize the settlement. Give her the house. I don't care. I'll buy 3 more. About the settlement, Julian." Ethan paused. "Her lawyers haven't responded yet, but the prenup is ironclad. She gets the house and the stipulated alimony. Your core assets, the fund, are completely protected." "Exactly," Julian said. "She was a nice distraction, but she can't compete in the major leagues. Now, if you'll excuse me, Ethan, I have a $10,000 bottle of wine waiting." He hung up and turned to Sierra, who was applying a final layer of lip gloss. "It's done," he said. "The anchor is officially cut." They descended the grand staircase to the restaurant. The maitre d' led them to the best table, positioned on a small private balcony overlooking the twinkling lights of the sea. It was obscenely romantic. "See?" Julian whispered to Sierra. "I own this place." Dinner started well. The food was undeniably brilliant. But Julian was waiting for his wine. Finally, Mr. Declan Reed himself approached their table, empty-handed. Mr. Thorne, my sincerest apologies. You found it, I presume, Julian said, annoyed by the interruption. Sir, as I explained, we do not stock that bottle. I contacted, as requested, our suppliers in San Francisco and even Geneva. It is not possible to source a double magnum of that vintage on such short notice. Julian felt a flush of anger. Not possible. Do you understand who I am? Not possible is not an acceptable answer. However, Declan continued, his voice dangerously quiet. We do hold one of the most select cellars in California. I would be happy to recommend a Pinot Noir from the Russian River Valley, or a cult-status Syrah that would far surpass. I don't want a Syrah, Julian snapped, raising his voice. Several diners turned to look. I wanted what I asked for. This is supposed to be a 5-star establishment. He's right, Sierra chimed in. You were told hours ago. Are you incompetent? Declan's eyes hardened, but his voice remained steady. I regret that I was unable to meet your expectations, miss. I will leave you to your meal. He turned and walked away. The nerve, Julian hissed. I'll have him fired for this. I'll buy this whole hotel and fire him myself. You should, baby, Sierra nodded, already over the wine and snapping a selfie. But the interaction left a sour taste in Julian's mouth. It was the first time since his arrival that his power had been questioned. It was a small crack in the facade of his perfect weekend, and it infuriated him. He felt a chilling sense of unease, a feeling that the deference shown to him earlier was not awe, but something else. A forced tolerance. The ghost on the balcony. The next day, Julian woke up with a dull headache. He was determined to erase the slight from the night before. He would spend the day projecting an image of such colossal wealth that the entire staff would be forced into self-abasement. He and Sierra walked out onto the breakfast terrace, clad in matching white linen. Julian was loudly detailing his plan to charter the hotel's vintage Riva speedboat for the day, when he suddenly froze. His coffee cup stopped halfway to his lips. Across the terrace, seated at a quiet table in the shade of a massive olive tree, was Clara. It was impossible. He blinked, certain the wine and the bright sun were creating a mirage. But it was her. She wasn't crying. She wasn't dressed in mourning. She wore a simple, elegant cream silk blouse and white trousers. La Europeana, he registered blankly. Her brown hair was pulled back into a simple bun. She was reading a book and sipping an espresso. She looked calm. Sierra, oblivious, was still talking. And I want them to pack a huge hamper with caviar and those tiny sandwiches and— Shut up, Julian hissed. What? Sierra asked, offended. Julian couldn't take his eyes off his wife. His wife, here, at the same hotel. How dare she? His mind raced, cycling through emotions. First shock, then burning rage. She was stalking him. She had received the divorce papers, and in a pathetic, desperate move, she had followed him here to— what? Confront him? Make a scene? Beg him back? A slow, cruel smile spread across his face. The initial shock subsided, replaced by a deep sense of satisfaction. This was even better than he had imagined. He thought she would crumble privately, in their empty mansion. But she had delivered herself to him. She had brought her humiliation to the most beautiful place on earth, right to his doorstep. Babe, what is it? Sierra asked, finally noticing his fixed stare. She followed his gaze. Oh my God, is that her? The soon-to-be ex-Mrs. Thorne, Julian sneered, his good humor restored. What is she doing here? Sierra whispered, horrified. This is our trip. It's so tacky. She looks so basic. She's desperate, darling. This is the last pathetic act of a dying animal, Julian said, savoring the moment. She thinks she can guilt-trip me. She thinks she can ruin our celebration. He watched Clara for a long moment. The most unsettling thing was her composure. She didn't look like a woman on the verge of a breakdown. She looked serene. She turned a page in her book. She ordered a second espresso from a waiter who addressed her with a familiarity that grated on Julian. Interactive question. At this point, Julian believes Clara is weak and desperate. Do you think her serenity is a sign of defeat or a hidden strength? Has the quietest person in your life ever surprised you with their power? Comment your thoughts below. Well, I'm not going to tolerate it, Sierra declared, standing up. I'm going over there and telling her to leave. No, Julian pulled her back, his mind formulating a far more delicious plan. Don't interrupt her. Let her have her breakfast. We'll be on the boat all day. The real fun, the real confrontation must be public. We wait until tonight, in the bar, just before dinner. We'll let everyone see her for what she is. What is she? Sierra asked, confused. A ghost, Julian said, his eyes glittering. And it's time to exorcise her. The public trial. The evening air was thick with the scent of jasmine. The main terrace bar was filling with the other guests. A German industrialist, a French actress, a Silicon Valley billionaire. It was a crowd of immense, quiet power. This was the stage Julian had chosen. He and Sierra took a central couch, ordering the most expensive champagne. He watched Clara enter the terrace. She was alone. She had changed into a simple navy blue silk dress. No jewelry, save for her simple gold wedding band, which she thoughtfully turned, and a pair of plain pearl studs. She took a small table by the balustrade, overlooking the sea. She ordered a glass of water with lemon. She's not even drinking, Sierra whispered, disgusted. She looks like she's trying to be boring. Time for the show, Julian said, standing up. He smoothed his custom-tailored blazer, took Sierra's hand, and began to walk toward his wife. He felt the eyes of the other guests following him. They recognized him from the pool. They recognized her from breakfast. This was going to be delicious. He stopped directly in front of her table. She looked up, her expression mild, as if noticing a waiter. Not the husband who had just filed for divorce. Clara, Julian began, his voice dripping with false pity. What a fascinating surprise. Hello, Julian, she said. Her voice even. Sierra, sensing her cue, stepped forward. I just don't understand what you're doing here, Clara. It's honestly pathetic. Can't you take a hint? He's with me. This is our vacation. Julian held up a hand, silencing Sierra with a gesture. Now, darling, let's be gentle. She's clearly going through a difficult time. He looked at Clara, his smile becoming a sneer. Seriously, Clara, this is a new low, even for you. Following me here? Did you honestly think you could fly to Laguna and I'd just, what, forget everything and take you back? Clara took a slow sip of her water. I'm not here for you, Julian. Oh, please, Julian laughed, a harsh sound that caused the German industrialist to look over in annoyance. Who else would you be here for? Did you come to scrub the floors? I didn't realize your little family trust was doing so badly that you needed a part-time job. You need to leave, Sierra insisted. You're embarrassing yourself. You're embarrassing him. She's right, Julian said, leaning in, his voice dropping to a confidential, cruel whisper. It's over. I've moved on. I've traded up. You need to accept it. Go home. Go back to your garden, or your charities, or whatever it is you do. You don't belong in this place. This world isn't for you. It's for people who take what they want. You're just the person who gets left behind. He leaned back, arms crossed, waiting for the tears, waiting for the collapse. Clara just looked at him. She held his gaze for 10 full seconds, her eyes clear and steady. There was no pain in them. There was no anger. He couldn't decipher it. It looked almost like pity. Are you finished? She asked. The question caught him off guard. Am I… what? Your speech? It was very… theatrical? Are you finished? Before Julian could reply, Mr. Declan Reed, the general manager, appeared at his side. His face was a mask of cold professionalism. Mr. Thorne, Declan said, his voice low, but carrying the unmistakable weight of authority. Ah, Declan, Julian said, turning to him triumphantly. Perfect timing. We seem to have a trespasser. This woman is not a guest. She is my estranged wife, and she is harassing me. Please escort her off the property. Quietly, if possible. I'm feeling generous. Sierra smirked, pulling out her phone, no doubt to film the walk of shame. Declan didn't look at Clara. His eyes were locked on Julian. Mr. Thorne, it is I who must ask you to be quiet. You are causing a disturbance to our other guests. Julian's smile vanished. Excuse me? I am the guest. She is the intruder. Get her out, now. I'm afraid you are mistaken, sir, Declan said. Ms. Sterling is our guest. You are the one who is no longer welcome. The terrace went silent. The only sound was the gentle lapping of water against the stone walls. Julian felt a cold dread, a sudden nauseating drop in his stomach. What did you just say? He said you are not welcome, Julian, Clara said, finally putting down her glass of water. She stood up. She was shorter than him, but she suddenly seemed to dominate the entire terrace. This is ridiculous, Julian sputtered, looking around for support. The other guests were pointedly looking away, pretending to be fascinated by their olives. I have the Grand Presidential Suite. I'm paying $20,000 a night. You can't… Declan, are you insane? Do you know who I am? I'm afraid I do, Mr. Thorne, Declan said, and I am acting under direct orders from my employer. Then bring your employer out, Julian roared. He's standing right in front of him, Clara said. The world seemed to tilt. Julian stared at her. He looked at Declan. He looked back at her. The dots connected, but the picture they formed was impossible. You're not… What? Clara asked. A guest? You're right, I'm not. I haven't been a guest here in 6 weeks. She turned to the manager. Declan, how are the new kitchen renovations at the Mariner coming along? I saw the invoices for the new Multani ovens. They are performing beautifully, Ms. Sterling, Declan replied, his voice now filled with the warmth that had been missing before. The chefs are ecstatic. Your choice was enojillos. Well, as always, perfect. Miss Sterling? Julian whispered. The name echoed in his ears. Declan had used it earlier, at the jetty, but he had assumed. I bought it, Julian, Clara said, her voice flat, as if discussing the weather. The Azure Coast Sanctuary, and the 2 smaller properties in Santa Barbara, and the vineyard in Napa. My quaint, little family office, as you called it, decided to expand its hospitality portfolio. This, she gestured to the stunning villa surrounding them, is one of its smaller, most recent acquisitions. Julian's mouth opened and closed. No sound came out. You're lying, he finally managed. This is a prank, a sick, twisted joke. Am I? Clara reached into her Bottega Veneta bag and pulled out a single keycard. It was a heavy, black, metal card. This is the master override. It opens every door in this hotel, including, I believe, the Grand Presidential Suite. She turned to Declan. Declan, Mr. Thorne and his guest are to be checked out immediately. Wait! Sierra shrieked, finally finding her voice. Her face was pale with shock. You can't do this! We have a reservation! We paid! On the contrary, Clara said, turning her cold gaze on Sierra. Your reservation, which was tied to Mr. Thorne's corporate account, was canceled this morning. As for payment, she looked at Julian. The credit card you have on file, the corporate Amex Centurion, was declined about, 2 hours ago. Quite a sudden dip in your available credit, it seems. Declined? It's impossible. My fund is worth 9 figures. I have an unlimited credit line. You had an unlimited Credit line, Julian, Clara corrected him. You see, that's the other thing I've been busy with. What? What other thing? Julian asked. But he dreaded the answer. The air had become thin. He couldn't draw a deep breath. While you were celebrating, I was with my legal team, Clara explained, her tone conversational. You were always so careless with paperwork, Julian. You found it so tedious. You just signed whatever Ethan put in front of you. The prenup, Julian said, grasping at a straw. It's ironclad. My fund is protected. Your fund, yes. Thorn Capital is all yours, Clara conceded. The problem, Julian, is that Thorn Capital is now worthless. Julian's blood turned to ice. What are you talking about? You're a hedge fund manager, Julian. You understand leverage. You understand collateral. She began to walk slowly toward him, and for the first time, he found himself stepping backward. The seed capital you used to start your fund 15 years ago, she continued. The angel investment you thought you'd wheedled out of that old banker. That wasn't him. It was my father. It came from my family trust. But it wasn't a gift, Julian. It was a loan. A loan collateralized not just by the fund's assets, but by every asset tied to the trust. And when you married me, you signed a waiver granting me, as the executor of my father's estate, total control by proxy over that collateral in the event of severe personal misconduct. I believe adultery, particularly with an employee, yes, I know Sierra was your marketing assistant, counts. The papers you signed this morning weren't divorce papers, Julian. They were default notices. Julian's phone, which had been silent all day, suddenly vibrated. He pulled it out with a shaking hand. A text from his COO, Robert. Margin call. All lines. JP Morgan is pulling our credit. Julian, what did you do? Another buzz. His private bank. Urgent. Immediate repayment demanded on all personal loans. Another. Thorn Capital assets. Frozen pending investigation. While you were at the pool, Clara said, I executed the note. The entire thing. The stocks you were shorting. My fund took the long position, backed by a consortium I put together. Your little bleed them dry scheme? You were betting against me, and you lost. She pointed to his wrist. That Richard Mill, the house, the jet you flew in on. They weren't yours, Julian. They were borrowed, and the loan has been recalled. Julian stumbled backward, hitting a stone pillar. He wasn't just divorced. He wasn't just embarrassed. He was ruined. He was nothing. The entire edifice of his life, his wealth, his power, had been a house of cards balanced on his wife's boring family trust. He looked at Sierra. Her face was a mask of horror and calculation. She was looking at Julian, but not with sympathy. She was looking at him as if he were a contagious disease. Julian, she whispered, her voice tight with panic. Is it true? Julian couldn't speak. He just stared at his phone, watching his life evaporate in a series of text messages. Oh my God, Sierra said, stepping away from him. Oh God, I need to use the restroom. She turned and fled. Not toward the restrooms, but back toward the lobby. She didn't look back once. Julian stood alone, surrounded by the quiet hum of the wealthy guests who were now openly watching him. He looked at Clara, the ghost, the beige, boring, predictable woman who had just dismantled his entire world before her water glass had even warmed up. Why? He whispered. The only word he could find. You asked me if I came here to scrub the floors, Clara said, her voice devoid of triumph. It was just definitive. I came here to sign off on the quarterly reports. You just happened to be here too. She signaled to Declan. Two large, polite, and unyieldingly firm security guards materialized from the shadows. Declan, Clara said, turning her back on Julian. Please show Mr. Thorne to the service exit. His belongings are being brought down. She walked away, not toward the restaurant, but toward a private study. A man Julian hadn't noticed before, a distinguished man in a dark suit, his lawyer, he realized now, stood up as she approached, holding a portfolio of documents for her to sign. "Wait!" Julian screamed. "Clara, wait! We can talk about this!" But she didn't turn around. She simply disappeared inside, the door closing with a quiet, expensive click. The descent into darkness. The humiliation was a physical thing, a cold, heavy blanket that choked the air from his lungs. The two security guards, both named Marco, never laid a hand on him, but their presence was a cage. They moved with the inexorable calm and certainty of men who dealt with unpleasant situations for a living. Their professionalism, a far deeper insult than any open aggression. Julian, who had commanded boardrooms with a single glance, was now led like a stray animal. They guided him not through the grand, marble-floored lobby where he had made his triumphant entrance, but through a series of sterile service corridors. The walls were stark white, scuffed with black marks from delivery carts. The air, previously scented with jasmine and expensive perfume, now faintly smelled of bleach and cooking oil. It was the resort's hidden anatomy, the guts he was never meant to see. Every step away from the opulent guest areas was a step down a staircase he didn't know he was climbing, a descent into a world he thought he had escaped long ago. The office they took him to was small and windowless, furnished with a single metal desk and a rolling chair with a tear in the vinyl. On the wall was a corkboard with staff schedules and safety notices. This was the back of house. This was where his imperial reign ended. His luggage, the entire matching set of custom monogrammed Rimowa hard-shell cases, which a personal shopper had assured him projected effortless global power, was unceremoniously piled by the door. It wasn't stacked neatly. It was dumped, a monument to his fallen status. A young staff member named Leo, with nervous eyes and a carefully neutral expression, was waiting. He avoided looking directly at Julian, focusing on a tablet he held with both hands. "Mr. Thorne," Leo began, his voice barely a murmur. Julian's instinct, the growling, cornered reflex of a deposed king, was to lash out. "Don't call me Mr. Thorne! Get Declan in here! Get the owner! This is an outrage!" Leo flinched, but held his ground. The Marcos, standing by the door, shifted their weight just slightly, a silent reminder of the new reality. Leo's refusal to engage, his adherence to protocol, was another wall Julian couldn't breach. He was no longer a guest to be placated. He was a problem to be processed. "I need you to sign here, sir," Leo said, holding out the tablet. "It's a receipt for your personal effects, acknowledging you have taken possession of them from the property." Julian stared at the screen. The list of his own belongings felt like an indictment. 1. Richard Mill watch, rose gold. 1. Pair of Loro Piana loafers. 3. Custom Brioni suits. It was an inventory of his ruin. He grabbed the stylus, his hand trembling with such violence that his signature was a jagged, illegible scar across the screen. He shoved the tablet back at the boy. Leo took it. His eyes flickered up for a moment. He seemed to brace himself for the next part. "Sir, your companion, Ms. Sierra, left a message for you." A flash of something pathetic and desperate ignited in Julian's chest. Hope. Maybe she had changed her mind. Maybe she was waiting for him, had organized a car. Maybe this was all a terrible misunderstanding. "What is it? Did she get a cab? Where is she?" Leo swallowed, his gaze fixed on a spot on the wall just over Julian's shoulder. "She said, and these were her words, sir, 'Don't ever contact me, ever.'" The words hit Julian with the force of a physical blow. Ever. Not, "I'm sorry," not, "I'll call you," but a final, brutal severing. He saw her now with horrible clarity, not as a partner, not even as a mistress, but as a parasite who had just detached from a dying host. He had seen her as a prize he had won. She had seen him as a position she had temporarily held. As if to twist the knife, Leo slid a small, sealed envelope across the desk. The paper was the same thick, creamy stock used for the restaurant menus. Julian opened it with clumsy fingers. Inside was no note of apology or explanation. It was a bill. It was a detailed list of every incidental expense he and Sierra had consumed since their arrival. It was all there, in crisp, relentless black ink. The 4 magnums of Taittinger Rosé poolside, the emergency Dior sunglasses Sierra had insisted on buying at the hotel boutique, the ridiculously expensive melon dish he'd sent back. Every charge was a tiny monument to his own foolishness. He scanned down to the bottom line, a number that would have been trivial to him that very morning, $22,480. Beneath it, stamped in a vicious, accusing red, were 2 words: payment declined. My cards. There must be an error, he stammered, the lie tasting like acid in his mouth. He knew there was no error. He could feel the digital guillotine Clara had dropped, severing him from the global financial grid. We are aware of the situation, sir, Leo said, his voice soft with what might have been pity. Ms. Sterling's instructions were to place it in your file. This copy is for your records. For your records. A final mocking piece of paperwork for the man who was now a non-entity. He crumpled the bill in his fist, the thick paper resisting, a final echo of the quality he could no longer afford. One of the Marcos pulled open the service door, revealing not the manicured, lit grounds of the estate, but a dark, gravel-filled path running alongside the building. The opulent, jasmine-scented paradise he had inhabited just minutes ago was a world away. Here, the air was cool and smelled of damp earth and the faint, unpleasant odor of a nearby row of dumpsters. The public ferry dock is that way, the security guard said, his voice flat and final. He pointed into the oppressive darkness. It is a 20-minute walk. The words hung in the air, absurd and impossible. A walk? Julian's voice cracked. You can't be serious. I need a car. Call me a cab, a boat. I'll pay, he added, the words hollow even to his own ears. We are not a taxi service, sir, the guard replied without a flicker of emotion. He and his partner stepped back. The heavy service door pulled shut, and the lock engaged with a definitive, metallic thud that resonated in the sudden silence. It was the sound of his old life being sealed off forever. He was alone, truly and utterly alone in the darkness, surrounded by luggage representing a fortune he no longer possessed. He looked at his hands, then at the Brioni suit that suddenly felt like a cheap costume. He had to move the bags himself. The thought was paralyzing. He bent down, his back protesting, and grabbed the handle of the largest case. It was impossibly heavy. He grunted, pulling it a few feet down the gravel path, the small wheels catching and scraping against the stones. He had to stop, breathing hard, sweat beading on his forehead. He set off on the long, humiliating trek, dragging the case behind him, the rattling of its wheels the only sound accompanying his ragged breathing. The path was uneven, and he tripped twice, his thin-soled loafers offering no protection against the sharp stones. Every painful step was a new humiliation. From above, he could hear the faint, elegant sounds of the world he'd been ejected from, the sophisticated murmur of conversation, the clinking of glasses, the soft melodies of a string quartet playing on the terrace. He imagined the other guests, the German industrialist, the French actress, looking at his empty couch, perhaps sharing a brief whisper of pity before returning to their champagne. He was already a ghost, a cautionary anecdote to be briefly savored. As the path curved toward the front of the estate, he caught sight of the main jetty, lit by wrought iron lamps. An elegant private water taxi, its mahogany deck gleaming, was pulling away. He instinctively ducked behind a thick cypress tree, his heart pounding with a new, sharper shame. He saw a flash of canary yellow fabric. It was Sierra. She was not alone. She was laughing, a bright, tinkling sound that carried across the water. Her arm was looped through that of the German industrialist, a man whose name Julian couldn't even recall. The man was older, with a quiet, certain posture that made Julian's own arrogance seem childish in retrospect. He was listening to Sierra, nodding, his expression one of amused indulgence. It was the same look Julian himself had worn just yesterday. He was watching his own role being replaced in real time. Sierra leaned her head against the man's shoulder, looked up at him with wide, adoring eyes, and then they were gone, the boat accelerating into the darkness, leaving a bright wake on the black water. She never looked back. Julian felt a wave of nausea. He leaned against the rough bark of the tree, the reality of his situation pressing in on him. He hadn't just been a provider. He had been a stepping stone, a temporary convenience. His grand romantic narrative had been nothing more than a commercial transaction, and his contract had just been voided. Finally, he stumbled out of the darkness onto the ferry dock. It looked nothing like the polished, private marina at the villa. It was a rough, weathered wooden platform with a single buzzing fluorescent light that drew a cloud of moths. A few other people were waiting, a young couple with backpacks, an older woman with a shopping bag, a local fisherman smoking a cigarette. They looked at him, at his ridiculously expensive, dirtied suit and his mountain of luggage, with open curiosity. He was a sideshow, the man who had fallen out of the sky. He sat down on his largest suitcase, the monogram JT seeming to mock him. High above, on the hill, the Azure Coast Sanctuary glowed like a private constellation. He could see the lights on in the grand presidential suite, his suite, where housekeepers were already erasing every trace of his existence. Then, his eyes were drawn to a different set of windows, in a wing of the villa he hadn't even known existed. A large corner office, lights blazing. A silhouette moved toward the window. It was Clara. She wasn't looking down at him. She was looking out over the dark, vast expanse of the sea. Her sea. She had a phone to her ear, nodding occasionally. Declan Reed stood respectfully a few feet away, holding a folder. Her lawyer, Ethan, was also there, pointing something out on a large plan spread over a table. They were working. They were building. This wasn't the end of a story for her. It was just another Tuesday night. She was an empress in her war room, and he had been a jester playing in her courtyard, completely oblivious to the scale of her power. The quaint little family office was a global enterprise, and he had been nothing more than a minor, misbehaving asset. His arrogance, his dismissal of her, his affair, were not grand, heartbreaking betrayals. They were simply liabilities on a balance sheet, and she, the consummate manager, had finally liquidated them. The ferry horn blared, a loud, ugly sound that startled him. The boat, a large, functional, utterly unglamorous vessel, pulled up to the dock. He stood up, his legs stiff, and began the laborious process of hauling his luggage aboard, bumping into the other passengers, mumbling apologies that felt foreign on his tongue. He found a hard plastic bench on the open deck and slumped onto it. The engines roared to life, and the ferry pulled away from the shore. He watched the lights of the Azure Coast Sanctuary grow smaller and smaller, until they were just another shimmer on the horizon. The cool wind whipped off the water, chilling him through his thin suit jacket. He put his head in his hands, the crumpled, worthless bill still clutched in his fist. He hadn't just been fired. He had been made obsolete. He had been erased. And as the boat churned through the dark, indifferent water, Julian Thorne, for the very first time in his life, began to weep. The last stop. The ferry slammed into the pilings of the Newport Beach Pier, a jarring, unceremonious arrival that vibrated through the cheap plastic bench and up into Julian's bones. The other passengers rose, eager to get home. Julian remained seated, a statue of frozen disbelief, until a deckhand yelled, "Sir, all out!" He stood, his body aching, and faced the immediate logistical nightmare of his life. The luggage. He struggled to heave the cases onto the dock, one by one, a sweating, grunting spectacle. His hands, accustomed to signing nine-figure deals, were now raw and blistered from the unaccustomed manual labor. The other passengers flowed around him, a river of normal life, parting around a rock of opulent misery. No one offered to help. They simply stared at the man in the $5,000 suit, now streaked with grime from the ferry deck, who looked like a refugee from a world they only saw in magazines. He was on the illuminated boardwalk. It was late, past 11, but the boardwalk was still alive with people strolling, eating ice cream, their laughter echoing over the water. It felt like a personal attack. He lined his suitcases up on the pavement like soldiers in a lost cause. He needed a cab. He needed a hotel. He needed to think. A taxi pulled up. Julian raised his hand, a gesture he had performed 1,000 times. The driver got out, looked at the mountain of luggage, looked at Julian, and sighed. "Where to?" he asked. "Hotel, the Montage," Julian said, grasping onto the only other luxury hotel name he knew. The driver's eyes widened, then narrowed. The Montage. He whistled, a low, assessing sound. This was a fare worth having. He began, with surprising efficiency, to load the bags into the minivan's trunk, a puzzle of leather and brass. Julian climbed into the back seat, sinking into the worn upholstery. The car smelled of stale tobacco and pine-scented air freshener. The drive was silent. Julian stared out the window as they left the downtown area. He was in a daze, a deep shock that insulated him from the full, crushing weight of his reality. He was operating on the muscle memory of wealth. He would get a room, call Ethan in the morning, and this nightmare would be sorted out. Clara had made her point. It was a brilliant, vicious power play, but it just couldn't be final. They arrived at the majestic entrance of the Montage, a hotel that rivaled the Sanctuary in its grandeur. The doorman, resplendent in a magnificent uniform, hurried forward and opened Julian's door, greeting him with a polished, "Good evening, sir." "Welcome." Julian stepped out, his confidence returning momentarily, reflexively. This was his world. He could fix this. He strode into the lobby, a breathtaking expanse of marble, chandeliers, and priceless antiques. He walked directly to the front desk, leaving the driver and doorman to handle the bags. "A suite, please," he told the clerk, a woman whose smile was a masterpiece of professional hospitality. "Ocean view, whatever you have." "Of course, sir. May I have a credit card?" "And your passport?" Julian pulled out his wallet. He handed her the Amex Centurion. The black card, his primary weapon and symbol, looked solid and real. He was Julian Thorne. This would work. The clerk swiped it. Her smile flickered just for a second. She swiped it again. "I am sorry, sir. There appears to be an issue." "That's impossible," Julian said, his voice a little too loud. "Run it again." "I have, sir," she said, lowering her voice, her eyes flicking toward the doorman. "It is declined." Declined? The word was alien. Fine. He was annoyed, not panicked. Not yet. He pulled out his J.P. Morgan Reserve card. "Try this one." She swiped it. The result was the same. Her smile was gone, replaced by a mask of polite suspicion. "This one as well, sir." "This is ridiculous," Julian said, his voice echoing in the cavernous lobby. A couple dining on the terrace turned to look. "Your system is broken. Call the bank." "Sir, it is nearly midnight," the clerk said. Her patience had clearly run out. "Both cards are declined." Julian's blood ran cold. The shock was fading, replaced by a freezing, creeping terror. It was real. Clara had done it. She had severed every line. He fumbled in his wallet. Cash. He had cash. He had withdrawn $1,000 at the airport for minor expenses. He'd given some to Sierra. He pulled out what was left, about $700. "Here," he said, pushing the bills across the counter. "This is for the deposit. I will straighten out the cards in the morning." The clerk looked at the small pile of cash with contempt. "Sir, our rooms start at $3,000 a night. This is not enough for a deposit or even one night, but I just need a room." "I'm afraid we have no availability for you, sir," she said. The final polite words of the execution, a discreet signal, and a security manager, not a bellman, was suddenly at Julian's elbow. "Sir, if you'll come with me, come at me, please." He was escorted back outside. The doorman, his face now a mask of disdain, was pulling his last suitcase out of the taxi. The driver stood, arms crossed, his expression furious. "My fare," the driver snapped. "To Laguna and the weight, $120. Julian stared at him. $120 for a ride that ended in his own expulsion. He looked at the $700 in his hand. He thrust the money at the man, his hand shaking. The driver counted it, handed him some change, got into his cab, and sped away, leaving Julian alone on the sidewalk, a pariah at the gates of paradise. He was stranded. It was past midnight. His luggage, his beautiful, useless luggage, was piled around his feet like a barricade. He couldn't stay here. He looked at the stack, 3 large suitcases, a garment bag, his briefcase. He couldn't carry it all. He made a decision. It was the first decision of his new life. He opened the largest case, his hands tearing through the contents. He pulled out a pair of jeans, a simple polo shirt, his toiletry kit, and his laptop. He stuffed them into his briefcase and his small roller bag. He zipped them shut. Then he stood up and looked at the rest. The Brioni suits, the custom shoes, the silk ties. Thousands upon thousands of dollars of his old life, sitting on a sidewalk in California. He turned his back on them. He left it all there. He started walking, pulling the single roller bag, its wheels rattling over the cobblestones. He walked away from the sea, from the lights, from the world he knew. He walked for what felt like hours, his feet screaming in his thin leather shoes. He headed for the one place he knew would be open, the train station. The area around the station was a different world. The grand villas gave way to nondescript 1960s apartment blocks. The scent of jasmine was replaced by the smell of diesel and stale beer. He found what he was looking for, a tiny 2-star albergo with a flickering neon sign that simply read, "Hotel." He pushed the glass door. The lobby was a tiny linoleum-floored room where a sleepy man in a t-shirt sat behind a plywood desk, watching a small TV. The man looked up, his eyes taking in Julian's dirty, expensive suit and his single high-end roller bag. It was a combination that screamed trouble. "You have a room?" Julian asked, his voice a dry croak. The man grunted. $80 up front. Julian pulled out his remaining cash. He had just over $500 left. He peeled off the bills and handed them over. The man took them, counted them, and slid a key across the desk. It was attached to a large red plastic fob with the room number 3B scrawled on it in faded marker. "3rd floor," the man said, pointing toward a small, coffin-like elevator. The elevator rattled up to the 3rd floor, the smell of stale cigarettes thick in the air. He found room B. The key barely worked in the lock, but after a struggle, the door sprang open. The room was a cell. It was dominated by a lumpy double bed covered in a thin brown and orange bedspread. A single bare bulb hung from the ceiling. The bathroom was a tiny plastic cubicle with a flickering fluorescent light that buzzed like an angry insect. The only window looked not onto the sea, but onto a narrow, dark alleyway, where he could hear the rattling of dumpsters and a distant argument in Spanish. Julian stepped inside. He dropped the roller bag. He didn't turn on the main light, leaving the room in the dim glow from the alley. He sat down on the edge of the lumpy bed. The springs shrieked in protest. He was alone. He was in a cheap hotel near a train station. He had $500 to his name. He caught his reflection in the cheap, warped mirror hanging on the wall. He saw a stranger, a disheveled man with hollow eyes, his face pale with sweat and fear. The arrogant king of Laguna was gone. In his place was this terrified creature. His Richard Mille still gleamed on his wrist. He pulled out his phone. He tried to call Ethan, his lawyer, and was directed straight to a busy signal. The number you have dialed is not in service, not voicemail. Disconnected. He tried to call Robert, his COO. This number is no longer active. He tried to call his private banker. Disconnected. Clara hadn't just frozen his assets. She hadn't just called in his loans. She had systematically dismantled his entire support structure. The lawyers, the bankers, the executives, they were loyal to the money, and the money was hers. He was excommunicated. He stared at the Richard Mille on his wrist. It was worth, what, $300,000? It was the only item of value he had left. It was his last lifeline. He unclasped it, the rose gold suddenly feeling impossibly heavy, almost obscene, in the sordidness of the room. He placed it on the chipped laminate nightstand, the quiet, elegant tick-tick-tick of its movement the only sound in the room, a relentless, indifferent clock counting the seconds of a life that had already expired. Conclusion and significance. Thank you for joining us for this story. It is a powerful reminder that arrogance often blinds us to the real power sitting just across the table. Julian saw his wife as a relic of his past, never realizing she was the architect of his entire present. He thought he owned the world, but he didn't even own himself. His bluster was not a sign of his success, but the trigger for his spectacular downfall, proving that quiet intelligence and hidden strength will always outlast the loudest boast. What do you think of Clara's revenge? Was it a perfectly executed power play, or a calculated move she had been planning for years? Should she have let him go quietly? Let us know your opinion in the comments below. If you enjoyed this story and want more tales of dramatic justice and incredible twists, please like this video, share it with someone who loves a good story, and most importantly, hit that subscribe button and turn on all notifications. We have new stories dropping every week, and you don't want to miss what happens next. Until next time.